We're going to call this meeting to order with the singing of the national anthem. Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north, strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Okay. Could I have a motion for the approval of our agenda? Councillor Andrews, seconded by Councillor Peters. All in favor? Thank you. Any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Council? None seen. Okay, now we're here at question period. Any questions from our audience right now? Yes, do you want to step up here and please give your name and address, please?
It's Ann Torrey, Torrie, at 62 Morgandale Crescent. I just was out with my grandson on Friday night, and we were coming across 2nd Avenue. The intersection at 1st Street, 2nd Avenue, and Elizabeth Street. And for those trying to picture it, it's Lord Dufferin and Dodds McNair. Mm-hmm. We came up, there was 2 vehicles in front of us. We were on 2nd Ave, and the first vehicle I noticed as we were coming up made a right onto 1st Street and made a U-turn and headed south. And the other vehicle sat in front of us for a bit, and then he did the same thing. And eventually, after about 5 minutes of this, from when I first approached, we made a right and I went around. I called Orangeville Police because of the time of night and said I didn't know how to get a hold of anyone from the town. And
sorry, what time of night was this again?
6:37.
And what day of the week was it?
It was Friday night.
Friday night.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I said to them I didn't know how to get a hold of the town and could they let somebody know this was happening. Because I watched after we came around and it was still red going east and west. Yeah. And I got a call back from the dispatcher about 15 minutes later saying that the town was aware of the situation and that due to the construction further down 2nd Avenue, she said it was going to be like that until the construction was done, that if you're on 2nd Ave heading to 1st Street, you will not trip the light, but if you're coming across Elizabeth to 1st Street, you will trip the light. It doesn't make sense to me that you're tripping the light to go towards the construction rather than tripping the light going away, especially with Dodds and McNair being on 2nd Avenue.
Right.
So my question is council aware of this, and does it make sense to anybody that it is set up in such a manner?
I don't think any council members are. We have our Director of Infrastructure, Mr. Jones, here. I wonder if he could weigh in on this.
Through you, Your Worship, I wasn't aware of that situation, but certainly you indicated that it was sensing traffic on Elizabeth Street heading eastbound, but not on 2nd Avenue heading westbound, correct?
That's what the dispatcher from the police told me when she called back and left me a message.
I can look into it further, but it is possible that some of the work that was done there removed the loops that are underneath the pavement that sense the traffic that would be on 2nd Avenue for westbound traffic. If that is the case, it would be commonplace to put the signals on what we typically call recall, which means that they would cycle between green in the 2 separate directions, regardless of whether there's a call on the side street. So if that's not done, we'll certainly look into making sure it is done.
It just didn't make sense to me.
right. Thank you very much for bringing that to our attention. Any other questions from the gallery? Okay. So we're going to move on to our operating budget presentation. And who's going to be handling that? Okay, Mr. Ed Brennan.
Your Worship, thank you. Tonight, staff will be presenting the first draft of the 2019 operating budget. Before I start the presentation, I would like to take this opportunity to thank staff for their work, all of the work they have done putting this budget together. As Council is aware, our Treasurer left the town for a new opportunity earlier this month. So tonight will be a little different. I will lead some of the discussions and the presentation. And of course, we will call on Mr. Jones, our General Manager of Infrastructure Services, Mr. Ray Osmond, the General Manager of Community Services, and our Acting Treasurer, Ms. Faye West, to give some detailed answers and clarification where required. From the OPS Police Services Board budget, I can confirm now that the Police Services budget is submitted and it's been approved by the board with a 0% tax levy increase this year. The agenda itself for today's presentation, we will look at the strategic review of our 5-year plan. The intent of today's presentation is to look at the highlights and the significant changes year over year in our budget process. The information was provided in our agenda package. It was also posted on the town's website. And we know from all the discussions we've had with elected officials that a lot of homework has been done and a lot of work has been done reviewing the package that we are presenting tonight. Please feel free to ask questions throughout at the high level. And following the review, we'll go back to the agenda document and we'll ask Council for direction with some of our recommendations for this year's budget, 2019. Our budget focus, we focus on several areas when we're trying to prepare a budget for the town. We certainly look at to maintain or to increase the level of services that our Council has directed staff to do. We continue to review how we deliver services, and we want to try to do that in the most effective and efficient way. We continue support to our community, our arts, our culture, and local organizations. We also increase investments into our infrastructure and our reserves. And of course, we always consider the impact on our residents, the taxpayer. In previous years, the last 2 to 3 years, what we've done is develop a 5-year budget plan, and we will have a quick look at the budget plan as we go forward. So the 5-year plan, net levy by department or division. So really what we're trying to show here is the overall impact in the next 5 years, realizing that Council will only be approving the 2019 budget, but and approving the other 4 years outward, onward in principle only. And then next year we would look at 220 in more detail. This year is a little more complicated. In the past year, we've had a couple major changes in the town. One, in our organization structure was changed. So again, how we're doing work and how we are built and combined as individual departments was changed. Also on our financial books, our charted of accounts, so all of our GLs and line items within our full budget system has been updated. So there's a lot of change. If you look at the column, the slide presented, we have a 2018 approved budget, and then we have the 2018 reorganized budget. What we're trying to show here is that from the 2018 approved budget to the 2018 organized budget, the net levy impact was $0. So all the changes that have taken place in the front of our financial software and our charted of accounts and the reorganization of the town reporting structure was a $0 impact on our tax levy. So now that we have a 2018 reorganized budget, it helps council to compare the dollar changes up and down certain line items closer. We get more of the apples to apple comparison, if you would. To pay more attention, what we're looking at in 2019, if we look at all departments through the town, the change would increase our tax levy to $36 million, just over $36.3 million. That would be an increase of $1.44 million, which reflects a 4.13% increase on tax levy. It's important for council to remember that this 4.13% does not include our growth. Growth will be identified a little later on, but this is a without growth number. Next. Impacts to the department. If we look at it another way from a overall departmental impact for 2019, again, if we look at the reorganization budget, what we've done in previous years, the last couple of years, council sets the level of service. We have came to recognize a base budget, so that is the dollars that are required to carry out the level of service that council has directed staff to carry out. So each year we say this is our base budget without change in level of services, and this is what we require to provide that level of service. At times you will see different columns here on this slide, one being one-time reversals, so that may be a one-time charge. There will be inflationary, and that actually should read inflationary and annualization. So two different things. One is the inflation of the economy. The other is annualization, and that could be agreements coming to in effect, other things that really impacts our total dollar. Then there is previous items that's endorsed. There are the one-time items, and then we're looking at service level change. One of the other items that we will look at more closely in our capital budget is the impact of a capital project or capital budgets on the operating costs. At times when we are doing capital budgets, it may result in more operational costs, maintenance, and stuff going forward. So we capture that in our line items as well. What we're saying here in 2019, with all the capital budgets going forward, we're going to increase our operating costs by an additional $68,000, $68.6 thousand. So if we go back in our one-time line items reversals, these are items here for a total of $180,000.4. These are items that we have done in 2018 that we are now recommending that we remove. The work is done. We do not need it in 2019. Hence, it's a reduction of over $180,000. The 2019 inflationary and annualization is totaling up to a total of $543,000. So inflation, things such as compensation, COLA, agreements coming, and other charges that may be forwarded onto this budget is identified as $543,000. Previously endorsed by council, there's a $700,000 fee or $700,000 increase recognized there. And our previous council accepted an approach of a 1% tax levy on our capital projects and then an additional 1% into our capital reserves. Their approach was to try to raise money to close our infrastructure gap. A number of years back, we had a report that came in to say that our infrastructure gap is too wide. We need to raise money in order to get some of this infrastructure repairs and some of our capital projects done. So that $700,000 is previously endorsed, and it's something that council will have to look at as we're going forward tonight. One-time items, there's a list of one-time items in our budget, and that is totaling up to a $301,000, and we can drill down on these items as we proceed. And service level changes. Staff are asking council, there's some service level changes that we are recommending to move forward. If we take the adds and the minuses on those service level changes, there's an impact of $9,393. This slide, again, is another way of looking at the reorganization. So when we did the reorganization, there was a number of things to look, but to council, to try to explain this a little more, one of the big things that we addressed was our insurance. So we are a fairly large organization, and we pay insurance, and this approach was trying to look at how do we equally distribute our insurance throughout our stakeholders in the organization and in the corporation. So you will see some pluses and minuses here on our insurance rates, and where there's a minus, we've been crediting these organizations or divisions, departments with a credit, but again, it nets out to almost a $0. Again, it is a reorganization. If you look at personnel, again, with a reorganization in our structure and a reporting structure, we've gone through all of our numbers and we've looked at saving dollars and reducing some of our staffing and reallocating. So there's minuses and there's positives. The total change is $33,901. You will notice an increase of $281,367 in administration. As we have talked with council, this is the identification of a general manager of corporate services and a procurement person going forward. Again, for council, if we look at this, it's a balancing out and reshuffling of dollars that's already approved in the budget. There's other items as identified, and they could be changes in facility user fees, facility utilities, maintenance costs, administrative expenses, and others. Again, if we look at the whole thing, of all the changes in the organization, there is a $0 net impact on our tax levy. So we move on to operating summary for water and wastewater. In our 2018 approved budget for water and wastewater, you will see revenues at approximately just over $13 million and expenses around $10 million. In 2019, we are proposing the revenues, we are estimating to come in about $13.5 million, and our expenses going down to about $9.39 million. So an increase in revenues, we're projecting a decrease in operating costs or expenses for a net difference of just over $4 million. So that money will be taken and put into our capital reserve. It's, we are legislated by the province to fund our water and wastewater works. We are required to have the money, and that is done by rate fees, rates charged for our water. Every 5 years, we will do a rate study, and that will look at our true costs, operating costs, and capital costs, and we will set those rates. From there, there will always be the up and downs, the plus and minus, but what is left, the variance, is put over to our capital reserve, and then we use that money to do our capital projects for water and wastewater. Again, from water and wastewater, we're looking at from 2017, 18, and 19, our rates were already set by the previous council. The consultant would have came in and done the full study and then came with the recommendations. Those recommendations were followed and are as presented. In 2019, we will be doing another rate study, and council will approve the rates for 5 years thereafter. Again, under water and wastewater, it's important to realize that our water and wastewater rates are separate from our tax levy. Yes, it is the taxpayer that are paying for it, but it's a user fee per se. It doesn't impact the tax levy. On this one, there's this slide you will see there's one-time items to be removed, a digital logbook, filter media, and pump maintenance that would be removed from the 2018 budget. 2019 budget, I should say, correction. Again, from a water and wastewater perspective, here again is the inflation and annualization. It should read inflation and annualization. If we start looking at some of the things that we're adding, other things that we're removing or reducing, the net impact change into 2019 over 2018 will be an additional $97,544. Again, if you look at water and wastewater, we're asking for some one-time items in 2019. There's a rate study that we've already discussed or alluded to earlier. There's a water meter study. This would be the water meters in our residential or commercial properties that we're looking at upgrading. The study will allow us to determine which way we want to go, what's out there to offer for such services, and then we can get our tender packages and stuff ready to go to public tender. Some upgrades in their SCADA system and some increases for maintenance and repairs at our wastewater pollution control plant. So if we look at our operating summary for tax levy, again, 2018, the approved budget, we expected just over $9 million, $9.3 million in revenues, and expenses at the $39 million to $39.5. So a net operating of approximately $30 million, 0.2. In 2019, again, what we're looking at is the revenues of just over $10 million, expenses of just over $40.5 million, for a net operating of $30.5 million. That is an increase of approximately $296,000, which is just less than 1% operating. So of all the changes that we're looking at in our operating cost overall, it is at approximately 1% or just under 0.98% at this time. So net transfer to and from reserves, last year at just over $2 million. This year we are looking at $3 million with an increase of $983,000. Transfer to capital, again in 2018 it was at $2.6 million. Now we're looking at about $2.77 million, increase of $162,000 or 6.2%. Net transfer from operating to capital, you're looking at an increase of $1.146 million, 24.58%. On the tax levy itself, net levy requirements, that's a 4.13%. So the $1.442 million in a percentage on our net tax levy is a 4.13%. If we can see here our estimated growth, these are numbers we get from Impact each year. So our growth, we're pretty certain it's from Impact, is going to be a 1.24%. So that's increased revenue for us. We take that off our 4.13%, and at this point in the presentation, we are at 2.89% increase in tax levy, just over $1 million. If we look at some of the drivers, some of the some drivers we're looking at here is First Street retaining wall, minus $20,000, and again, a removal of other items totaling approximately $35,000. So again, it's about $55,000. These are items we had in our 2018 budget. It's a one-time expense, and we're not requesting it in 2019. Previous endorsed. The one thing that we did have endorsed by our council, as we talked before, was a transfer to capital and a transfer to general capital reserve fund of 1% of tax levy. 2019, that 1% is approximately $350,000, which would equate to $700,000. If we look in 2020, I think an important thing for council to remember, once that $700,000 is approved, that becomes to form a part of our base budget for next year. As we said, we work on the principle, this is the base budget, and here are our adjustments for the next year. Once you approve this money, it becomes a part of our base budget, and then the next year, an additional 1% and 1%, or a total of 2% of tax levy is included. So I recommend that it is something we discuss as we go forward tonight in our budget deliberations. So again, some of the other drivers, if we look at this, inflation and annualization, we're looking at things as compensation. As when we tabled the budget back earlier or later last year, compensation, the previous council said, okay, let's look at CPI at the end of, I think it was the end of May that we agreed to, and that compensation number is what we will use to bring forward to work on our estimates. Well, last year, 2018, the CPI at the end of May was for Ontario, where we live, was 2.9%. We felt that was quite rich to come in and ask council for a 2.9% COLA raise. However, so we looked at the national rate for the end of May, and it was a 2.2%. And that's what we came in and proposed to council at 2.2%. It at least allowed us to say, with this number, this is what the projected costs would be. This list here again, you look at a number of drivers from inflation and annualization. So compensation would be sort of a inflation. There's transfer to reserves of $262,000, debt services charges of $103,000. There are some tax write-offs, about $100,000. There's some increased IT and telecommunication items, around $73,000. Some other capitals, there's materials and supplies. There's also increased revenues. If you look here from municipal agreements, there's revenues from our fire services and things of that nature. Some increased revenues on our investments that we do and we are recognizing. User fees increases. If we go down to the police compensation, there's a request from a police budget. Their compensation is increasing about $450,000, $449,000. There's some smaller other requests of $58,000, but the police are also projecting an increase in revenues of $293,000, and they've reduced their transfer to reserves of $214,000. So really, the net impact on their budget for 2019 is $0. In 2019, here is another list that you will see throughout the budget and the budget requests of some one-time items again. They include a $4,000 ask for a welcome video. A number of years back, we had a welcoming video. It helps with the tourism culture, so we're recommending that we would upgrade that video and use it going forward. The cannabis, since this budget was tabled, we are now confirmed that our increase in cannabis funding from the province is increased, and that's going to be an extra $27,000 a year. We were estimating $5,000. That's increased now to roughly $27,000, and it's two payments per year, so $13,000 and something each payment to a total of $27,000. Those updates will be reflected on our tally sheet at the end, so we can see the changes overall in our budget and our projections. Council chambers renovation, we're referring to this project that we're looking at, the council chambers that we are now sitting in. There was a large project that was done over the summer months. We required an extra $137,000 approximately to finish this project. The bids came in higher than we expected. The previous council directed that we use the reserve, but we put that money back into the reserve. Again, this council could make the decision, say, let's just leave it with reserve money. Let's not have an impact on our tax levy this year. And of course, we could reduce it accordingly. Development charge studies, we have to get done this year. It's a requirement, and that would be an extra $5,400. It'd be a one-time thing. Track loader replacement tracks, $5,200. some lane ropes at Alder Street for $6,800, and the fountain lights here on Broadway of $18,000, again for council considerations. Those were a total of $171,380. Again, if you look at in 2020, there's more projections of ask that will be coming, but again, council will look at those in detail next year. There's also a number of service level changes. So here are some of the one-time items that we're asking for, and here are some of the service level changes that we're looking for. In 2019, we are looking at our records manager or records management coordinator. It's a position that we have right now on contract. It was being paid out of our reserves that we have raised over the years. Those reserves money are gone, and we're recommending now that it be transferred to our tax levy. It is our human resources is looking for a summer student, which is about a 0.3 of an FTE, a full-time employment. It really be a couple of months of work to help out with our HR division. If you look at the recreation program assistant, we're looking at there, and that actually should be corrected, be a 0.68 or a 0.7 off a FTE, and that cost would be offset in our recreation world with user fees. So we increase programming, we increase opportunities for our residents to come in, partake in our programs, and some of the money that we raise or that we get from user fees is used to offset staffing levels and other costs to deliver those programs. Our control station, customer service, and again, that's in the recreation world. We are trying to get better coverage for our customer service to increase customer service. So there's an ask of about approximately $18,000 or a 0.4 of an FTE, a full-time employee. So that is really the ask for 2019. If you look at 2020, 2021, and onward, I would just want to clarify that some of these numbers, they are comparing the numbers into our 2018 budget. So if I look at 2021 with the ask of $128,000, that is not an increase of the $121,000 in 2020. In reality, it's comparison to our 2018 numbers.
Can I interject for a sec here? So this records management coordinator, you said it was a contract position to this point? So they're already on board?
Correct.
And it's necessary for this to be, this records management function to be carried forward in perpetuity?
Well, I'll put it to you, Your Worship, as our records management is something we've been endeavoring for a number of years. It is very complicated. There's many boxes of files, both paper, hard records, but there's digital records. How do we integrate all this going forward into our websites and into accessibility to be open and transparent? How do we file stuff? How do we retain stuff? Freedom of information and all of that. So it is important that we have an expert, someone qualified to guide us through that and get the framework and lead going forward, yes.
So this is an interdepartmental position. They're going to be helping all departments with their records management? Is that right?
Correct. This will be for the corporation as a whole.
Okay, thank you.
So some other highlights in our operating budget is our continuous support to various communities initiatives and our community groups. We have a facade program, improvement grant program for $30,000 a year. That's been very positive. We support our Credit Valley Conservation. Right here we're showing $262,000. I think the right corrected ask is $285,000. We provide money to the Vicky Barron Trail, which is our Island Lake Conservation Area. The residents of Orangeville get to use that trail for many, many years. It's a great location, and we support the maintenance on those trails at $35,000 a year. Theatre Orangeville and the Opera House, we pay as a $35,000 a year. And we also pay them $50,000 a year to run our visitor information services. Those are 5-year contracts, and I think we have 4 years remaining on the contracts with our group. There's also things of our tree maintenance program of $280,000 a year, and community grants, which is about $35,000 a year, and we'll look at that closer in another slide. As council is aware, we do have a number of committees of council which act as advisory committees to council. Recognizing that there's a change in the number of committees going forward this year with this council, and that will be clarified in the coming weeks and months. However, we do commit approximately $100,000 to the various committees of council to support them in their endeavors in operating their committees and bringing back recommendations or advice to council. If we look at this slide here, again, it's been a change since this was tabled. So there is an updated slide which we will just bring up at this time for council's consideration. So to update, we have a list of requests, basically totaling 12 requests that have come into the town for support to their committees and their events or their activities. If you look at this, there is an eligibility criteria that's been set by council, and there was an intent on this side here if the asker or the person with the ask, if they qualified or not according to the criteria that was formed or approved by council. In any case, what our ask that we've got in, the request to date, is just over $102,000. Council have set aside $35,000. So some decisions have to be made by council on who gets what, or do you increase how much money you are going to provide to these groups. We will just flip back to our original slides.
Councillor Sherwood would like a word. Go ahead.
Are we discussing those now or waiting further on in the presentation? I have some questions with regards to some of the applications. So are we submitting questions now?
You want to take it now?
Or should we just continue on and then we're going to
I think maybe we'll continue on since we haven't had a whole lot of questions at this point, and maybe it'd be easier once we get to some of the recommendations to cover off of some of these asks, or we can go back to this slide and deal with it individually if you wish.
Sure.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next slide, it's an item for council to consider. Past projected financing and renewal funds with surpluses. So what staff is recommending here, in the past we've had some projects that are still on our books. We've had, as you see, the projects on your left-hand side are identified, be it Parkinson's, Young, Lions Park. There's a number of projects that the town has taken and we still owe, we're paying it off. It's sort of a debt financing. So that's totaling to about approximately $1.337 million. Of course, we pay interest on our debt to service these debts, and that's approximately $179,000. And to capture these next couple of slides, what staff is recommending, there's a surplus in the previous 2016 budget and 2017 budget that has not been reallocated yet. What we are recommending is that we take the money from the two surpluses, 2017 and 2016, and apply it towards the debt and these past projects. In doing so, what council will realize is that we can reduce the total annual reduction of about $438,000. We would leave about $130,000 in the parkland reserve each year. We would not be taking from that reserve. And of course, it'd be a reduction of about $308,000 on our tax levy. So to look at it a little further, the unallocated surpluses in 2016 was approximately $1.25 million. The unallocated surplus in 2017 was $1.5 million. If we pay it towards these projects, and then what we're recommending is what's left over is to distribute some of it back to our divisions and the departments that really put that money out. So again, you know, if you look at the police services reserve, they really paid some of this money out to get their stuff done. We're saying right now what we should do from their surplus is put it back and let them use that money. The same with the library, the seniors, some of our committees and such. There's also a transfer of over $100,000 to our capital. In reality, this is just under $500,000 going back into our reserves as such. So the full impact, the surplus reallocations, would reduce future operating costs by an estimated $438,000 per year. The impact would mean that $130,000 per year would stay in our parkland reserve, or parkland development reserve, so we would not be drawing off that every year, so that's a bonus. And $308,000 per year reduction in tax levy. In today's 2019 budget tax levy, that's a reduction of about 0.88%. So if we flip back to the 2.9 or 2.89%, with this move, you would reduce your tax levy increase overall to 2.01%. So as we start looking at this and going forward, there will be some directions required from council. We would ask, if we start looking at our agenda, there's a list of different recommendations that we will go through and we can have some discussions, but we would ask council for a resolution to adopt the budget reorganization, to adopt the one-time items, the previously endorsed items to discuss and adopt, inflation and annualization, service level changes, and then items to be considered, such as community grants, surplus allocations. We will look at the 2019 operating budget adoption with water and wastewater and the tax levy. And of course, we would ask council to adopt the next year's, our 5-year plan from 2020 to 2023 in principle only. Worship, okay. Any questions?
Well, first of all, thank you for that comprehensive report. Very good. For those of you who don't know, Mr. Brennan also carries the title of Deputy Treasurer. So he has to fill in from time to time. So thank you very much. I know it's a difficult time when our town treasurer has gone off to greener pastures in the middle of our budget session. So thank you all town staff for pulling together and helping council and our residents with this information. So first of all, any comments at this point from council? So okay, there we go. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Your Worship. Can you hear me here? I was told to pause before I speak tonight, so I'm going to do that. I would just like to start this off and make a motion. I know that's fairly okay. Not a normal thing to do, but it's okay if I go ahead and do that?
Of course.
I'd like to pass this out to council if I could. I'll start off by saying that whereas Orangeville's current level of reserves is at acceptable levels for a town of our size, and whereas Orangeville's current level of debt is also at acceptable levels for a town of our size, and whereas Orangeville's taxation rate is currently one of the highest in Ontario, I would like to make the motion that we reduce the tax levy in 2019 from 2.89% to 0.6%. 2018 was 34.8 million. The 2019 proposed is 35.9 essentially, which is an increase of just over $1 million. So my proposal is that we reduce the allocation set aside for the capital budget and capital reserves to 0.5%. That will reduce our overall tax levy by $350,000 annually. The council chamber renovations of $136,000 be moved from the tax levy and instead have the money paid from reserves. I want to take advantage of the surplus allocation recommendations given by our treasurer. This will save an additional $308,000 per year on our tax levy. And the implementation of all of these decisions will save $794,000 in 2019, which would leave an overall tax increase of $215,000. This would equate to an increase of 0.6%. In addition, tonight, if you're following along at home, this is just the operating budget. Tomorrow night, we would challenge the capital budget, and that 0.6 would be adjusted either up or down based on what we decide to do as a group with the capital budget. So I think that basically summarizes what my motion would be.
Well, just to comment on all of these items that you've brought up, specifically the three regarding setting aside the capital budget and capital reserves recommendation from last council to save $350. I'm fully supportive of that, as I am of moving the $136,000 of renovations and having it paid from reserves. And the recommendation from the Treasury Department, I guess, which was paying down some debt and through unallocated funds from 2016 and 2017, allowing us to reduce our tax levy by 308. I like all of it. I think it's very good. I still think we, and I would like to second your motion, but I still think we need to continue along here and go over some of these other items tonight. But yeah, so we've got councillors lined up. So there we go. There we go. Okay.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
I too would support that motion. I just wonder where that leaves us in regards to, like the Legion, that $100,000 in wants. How would that fit into your zero?
Well, I think we need to continue and go through all of these items on top of what Councillor Taylor is recommending. Are you agreeing to that? Yeah. So I think we still need to look at the funding for those grants and, yeah.
So to your worship, can we do this motion now, or do we need to wait till we do this other exercise?
I think, yes, Mr. Brennan.
Your Worship, you can pass the motion now if you want. We will still go through the agenda if you,
Yes.
With your concurrence.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
that way we can, as each motion, if it's already covered, we will just pass it. However, it may leave the opportunity for council to have other questions. You know, when we get to the grants and stuff, we can go back. We can then open up our tally sheet, our running tally sheet, and we can plug those numbers in, and then we can tell you exactly what type of impact these numbers would have on our net tax levy.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I do agree with the deputy. To me, these things would expedite the process that we're in. It seems like we have agreement on this. I don't want to speak too early, but overarching, this would take over a large part of what we're talking about tonight. But there would be things, in particular, the service clubs and different groups that we would need to discuss. It felt like too much to add to an overarching motion to put all that in, and I knew there would be differing opinions on that, so I didn't include that in the motion.
Right. Okay. Councillor Peters. Oh, I'm sorry. Hang on. We're going to get used to
Thank
this.
you, Your Worship. Yeah, if it's not one mic problem, it's another, right?
Sorry.
I'm told tomorrow, maybe for my mic, so I'm sharing for this evening. Hopefully everyone can hear me. First of all, thank you very much to Councillor Taylor for putting together a comprehensive motion here. I'm just going to say sort of my piece here. I don't support it in full. There's many aspects of it that I do, such as the renovations and the allocations that have been given. Specifically, I'd like to hold back on the reserve discussion. I agree that accelerating them at the current pace is not likely the best direction and that we have some comfortable amounts. But until we speak on the capital side and until we decide whether this is the year to implement that change, I wouldn't be supportive of that particular piece of the motion.
Okay. Any further comments from councillors? Because, we need to call a vote here. Oh, I'm sorry. Councillor
Yes,
Taylor.
thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Peters. The conversations that I had with town staff regarding the level of reserves, they are acceptable. There's a grid that was done up, and they are acceptable based on where we are. My motion would be just for 2019. We would talk about moving forward and what we would do with reserves and capital and whatnot, and the other 350 moving forward. And then the other piece would be what I think is really important. No one likes debt. The interest on debt is obviously an expense. The Ontario government is up against that right now themselves. But the reality is you should have debt to manage your household or manage a town. And our debt levels are at very acceptable levels right now. So our reserves and our debt levels are both in good stead. So I think it's a 2019 discussion, not a 5-year plan.
Hold on a second. There you go. Sorry.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the comments through you to Councillor Taylor. Appreciate the comments and agree that we're in a comfortable spot for the current year. I just think until we've had the capital discussion on the budget and where we stand, it may be premature to drop a single year if in anticipation, future years would be just brought back up. So flatlining sounds, like a positive step, but perhaps decreasing it. I'd like to have the discussion around the entire budget top to bottom and make the call on reserves at that point. So that was sort of my rationale. But on the debt allocation, I'm fully behind that as well.
Councillor Taylor.
It's delayed. Thank you, Your Worship. I feel passionate that this is the right thing to do for the town, and out of respect for Councillor Peters and the rest of council, if it would make this go through, I would be open to a friendly amendment, and that is at this time to take out the reference to the capital reserves moving to 0.5. And what we could do, my suggestion would be, is we could move that to tomorrow night's discussion and instead just cover off the 0.5 that is related to this discussion and move the capital to tomorrow night, if it helps to pass this.
Okay. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, I wanted to thank Councillor Taylor for this motion. There is many things that I am fully in agreement with, and I'm glad you're clarifying, Councillor Peters, about the reserves. I feel too the same way, that I'd like to get into further discussions with capital. I'm very much in favor of moving of the council chambers renovations and to reserves and the surplus. I'm also was wanting to put down, and I don't know if this is something I have to do as a further motion or if this could be amended or considered as part of this motion, is looking at the 2.2% COLA. I was considering having discussion of reducing that a little bit.
Well, I think that's maybe a second motion if you're going to bring that up.
Okay.
I would, so if I can recap this for Councillor Taylor, you'd like to amend your motion to take the capital reserve portion out of it. So that would be $175,000 change to the budget, correct? Okay, so again, I'm going to defer to Madam Clerk for a moment here. So there's been a friendly amendment by the person who put the motion on the floor. I'm willing to second that change. And now we're going to have further comment okay. So we've got Councillor Peters again.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just for the benefit of those listening, I was wondering if perhaps at this point we could ask Mr. Brennan just to explain the difference between the two amounts we're talking about. So this is both a transfer to capital budget and a transfer to capital reserve, each currently slated at 350. So just, again, so everybody has a sense of what those numbers are that we're talking about, and not everybody's read through these documents like we have, so if you're suitable to that.
Yes. Please, Mr. Brennan, thank you.
Yes, Your Worship, through you. So there's two components. One is a transfer of 1% off the tax levy to capital projects, and the other is to capital reserves. So one way of looking at it is that the 350 to capital projects will go directly to the project and be used that year. And the reserve itself, it could go into exactly what it is. It's the reserve. So it will be this pot of money or this fund that's laid aside, and we can build that fund to a certain level, and council can draw from that. So you'll see in some years in some of our projects that we're putting on that that we are, you know, the method of paying or funding. Some may say tax levy, others may say DC funds, and others may say capital reserves. So when we put this money to transfer to capital reserves, the intent is to put it there to help build our reserves over the long run. The 350 into capital projects, it's basically, this is this year's use. We're going to use it this year to do some of our capital projects, and it's going to be funded that way. Now, we have to realize that this is going into capital, but it starts off as operating funds, and then we transfer it over, and it's capital. We refer to it as capital. In reality, there's one taxpayer. There's only one type of dollars, and we're going to put them over here, but it's the end use is what's a little different. You could also look at this and pass a motion tonight on what you want to do with the capital reserves. Once we start looking at the capital projects tomorrow in our budget deliberations, you can see where some of the impact would be on those decisions. Though I don't encourage council passing motions tonight and then reconsidering them tomorrow, however, for the one-offs, it may be something that you want to consider. So you could pass a motion tonight to reduce it by, down to 0.5 or 0.5% instead of 1. And tomorrow, when you look at the total impact, you may say, something, let's leave it back up there for this year, and we'll address it throughout the year in next year's budget.
Councillor Peters, does that sound like, okay. Let me, first of all, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I would support the original motion. I wouldn't support the second motion. I just think staff is telling us they have enough reserves, so I really think we should give the taxpayers a break and go for this. I just think now's the time. Thank you.
Councillor Taylor.
This is, I guess, politicking on my part, but I would agree with Deputy Mayor. And that is, we've been advised by staff that we have enough. I am trying to work with council, and I think we all are, to get this through. So that's why I was open to doing it. But tomorrow night, my position will be the exact same thing, and that is we need to reduce this by $175,000 out of the capital budget. So, in the spirit of getting along, delay 24 hours. I don't know, my inexperience as a politician would say I don't know what to do with the motion now, but at the same point, my position on the taxes will not change.
Right. So, just to clarify, Mr. Brennan, so you'll have no issue of us tomorrow night if there's capital projects that we feel need to be funded from a change that we do tonight, we can bring that back tomorrow night, and no issues.
That's right. Correct, Your Worship, as long as the clerk doesn't throw something at me here. But in reality, you put forward a motion for consideration, you can vote on that, and then you put your new motion forward, and I think this council should be fine with it.
Okay, so I think we're going to go backwards here and just take the original motion, which has been seconded, and I'd like to call a vote on that original motion. Okay, all in favor? Opposed? Councillor Peters is opposed. The motion carries. Okay. So I guess we'll go into our budget items now. We have 6.11. So the recommendation is that the reorganized operating budget, which has a zero impact on the tax levy, be approved as presented, and it is on page 35, councillors, for those of you who want to put it up on your screens. Any comments on this recommendation? Councillor Post.
I'm just happy to move it as written in the agenda.
Okay. We have a seconder for that. Councillor Andrews. All in favor? Okay, that's passed unanimously. Thank you. Agenda item 6.12. Recommendation that previously endorsed items totaling $700 be included in the 2019 tax levy. We have a motion that has corrected that number now. Do we want to correct this on? No, that motion's already been dealt with. Okay, we can move on. Thank you. 6.13. Inflation items totaling $445,810 be included in the 2019 tax levy operating budget. Any comments on this? Councillor Sherwood.
This is where I was hoping to put through a motion that we, however, we've been given a lesser amount for COLA of 2.2. Salaries is one of the biggest part of our budgets. Right. And I'm wondering if I would get support of my fellow councillors to bring that to 2%.
Okay.
So that would be my motion.
Right. Do we have a seconder for that motion? Okay, Deputy Mayor McIntosh. Comments? Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Your Worship. With respect to Councillor Sherwood, I don't agree with the submission. And with respect to the town of Orangeville, who is overtaxed, I don't think this is an area we should be looking into. I worry about the staff that we have now that are in key positions. We just lost a treasurer. We can argue the fact that it may not have been over money. It might have been over lifestyle. It's irrelevant. The point is, when we lose someone, the ability to get someone to come who's qualified is a very difficult thing to do. The amount of money that you may pay someone today, it might take exponentially more to get someone to fill that exact same position. I don't think 2.2% is unreasonable. It's below inflation, and it's a sensitive area when you're talking about someone's livelihood. I don't think we want to recognize staff in this derogatory way. So I won't be supporting this initiative.
Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would echo some of Councillor Taylor's comments. I believe we've already made a reduction of sorts from the 2.9 to the 2.2, looking at sort of a number that's apt to fluctuate quite a bit this early into term, and in the interest of retention and building a staff that is qualified to run the city. I would not support the motion. Town, sorry.
Mm-hmm. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, through you, Your Worship. I will agree also with Councillor Taylor and Councillor Peters. I think that, in today's climate, we have to be able to attract the right people, those that are strong in their acumen. We have to be able to retain them. And I think that the 2.2 COLA is certainly acceptable in today's climate. Thank you.
Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, I respect my fellow councillors for their reasonings, and I do support you on that as well. I was thinking is because I'm looking at the 2019 budget, that 2% is still good. Being mindful that I see in the 2020 budget, there is talk of a salary review where some significant adjustments could be made after that point for retaining staff. So that was my point in wanting it this year, because there is an upcoming salary review that could make some significant compensations adjustments in the future. That's all.
So my understanding is in Ontario last year there was a bit of an uptick in the consumer price index as a result of increased minimum wage in Ontario, and I think that's probably the reason the 2.9 number is out there. I think staff has recognized that anomaly for this year and have agreed to a lower number than they may have been able to argue strongly for. So I appreciate their reduction to 2.2, and I think I would support the 2.2 at this point. We're going to be cognizant and watchful of these numbers going forward, and I know Councillor Sherwood is heart's in the right place, and I appreciate her thoughts on that, as I do Mr. Taylor and Peters. But we've got a motion on the floor right now, which has been seconded, so we're going to call a vote now. All in favor? I'm sorry? The motion was to reduce to 2% the CPI or COLA to 2%. That was the motion, to reduce to 2%. So those in favor of reducing staff COLA to 2%, against? That motion failed, 5-2. So Taylor, Post, Peters, Brown, and Andrews in opposition. Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In light of that motion not succeeding, I would make a motion to move the recommendation for 6.1.3.
Okay. May I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Taylor. Any comments on that motion? Councillors? Okay, we're going to call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? Opposition is Councillor Sherwood. That motion passes. Thank you. 6.14, that the 2018 one-time items totaling $55,400 be removed. May I have a motion? Oh, hold on. We got Councillor Taylor.
I'd like to make a motion that 6.1.4 be accepted as is written.
Okay. Seconder, Councillor Post. All in favor? Passed unanimously. Thank you. 6.15. Pardon me. That the 2019 one-time items totaling $171,380 be included. I know that we've got one of those issues has been resolved. That's the council chamber renovations, but there's some other discussion there. May I have a motion on that? Okay. Councillor Sherwood.
Can we have an update of that figure? Because we've removed the council renovations, and I believe we've got some additional funding for the cannabis, like 27. Can we have an up-to-date figure first before I vote on this?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you guys have that? Mr. Brennan.
Your Worship, we are just going to run some numbers here now. Okay.
Well, while we're there, I just wanted to talk about a couple of those numbers there on this one-time items. The welcome video. If you see in 2020, a tourism strategy, an amount of money there, I've also had discussions with the BIA, with members of the BIA, discussions with Headwaters Tourism, discussions with Dufferin County Tourism. I personally feel there needs to be a little more of a comprehensive look from a number of organizations that should be working together in one rowing in one direction, so to speak. So a couple of the items here that, you know, I see the welcome video, and also coming out of the Roger Brooks presentation, which suggested that maybe the median down Broadway was something that needed to be reviewed. And we've got $18,000 there in fountain lights, which I don't think there's pressing need for that right now. And my thoughts would be to defer the welcome video until there's some more in-depth tourism discussion about Orangeville and Dufferin County, and also to defer the fountain lights until such time as a decision on downtown revitalization and more comprehensive look at the downtown core was done. So let's go with, we've got Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll start with a question, then I've got a comment or two, if you don't mind. Through you to Mr. Osmond, is there any benefit to replacing both sets of lane ropes? It looks like it's split over 2 years. I know we're talking about a small amount, but just in terms of implementation or ordering, is there any benefit to doing both of those purchases in a single year?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Peters. First of all, I apologize because there's the one in 2020 should not be repeated. It's the replacement for Alder, and we're good in Tony Rose, so we'll be taking that one off in 2020.
Okay, very good.
Excellent. And then as a bit of commentary, I echo your comments on the welcome video. It's perhaps a bit premature, especially with a website item being presented tomorrow night in the capital budget. I also echo delaying the fountain lights without offering an opinion on the media in general, but I think for now that we could hold off on that as well.
Okay. Councillor Andrews.
Through you, Your Worship, we seem to be echoing much of the same thing as we go through the budget deliberations tonight. I certainly also support your observation regarding the welcome video. I think collaboration with the other agencies and organizations is very important, and we still have much planning ahead to see how this collaboration can end up fostering some very positive messaging to not only our town but also the region. My only question about the fountain lights, and again, this would be probably through Mr. Jones to get some clarification. Would not replacing those fountain lights pose some safety issues, or is that more aesthetic than anything else?
Mr. Jones. Sorry.
Through your worship to Councillor Andrews, they are aesthetic. The existing lights have leaked and are no longer functional. It would simply mean that the lights for the fountain would remain non-functional until such time as money was allocated to their repair.
Okay. And again, I would end up echoing your point about deferring that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I too am, candidly, I'm ambivalent about the issues that were brought up. If I will support council on those. However, thinking outside of the box, and I guess through yourself, Your Worship, to Mr. Osmond, my question would be would it make sense then, we wouldn't have all of the savings here by doing this. However, I worry greatly about the capital that we have to put forth in our town, especially over the next couple of years. And I'm looking at item 12 on this page, thinking about the recreation master plan. Tony Rose, which I spend a significant amount of my time in, it is set up, coming up in the capital budget, for a large amount of money. And I'm wondering, I guess, Mr. Osmond, if it would make sense to move that to 2019, given the savings that we've just discussed. And it wouldn't quite offset council, but at the same time, it would be reasonable. I'm wondering if there's a benefit to doing that.
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Taylor, certainly if it's your desire to do that, you can do that. The intent to go to 2020 was to try to put it into a time frame that aligns with some issues with Tony Rose, as well as opportunities we have with our going forward with our particular program. Some of the things that come up from council in 2019 may have an impact on what we do with the master plan in 2020, and that's why we kind of moved it to 2020. But if it was council's desire to do it in 2019, we would probably do it later in the year and trigger it later in the year, so it kind of overlaps into 2020. That'd be one option. In terms of the amount that you alluded to, $75,000 for a population this size is a standard in the industry.
Mr. Osmond, the Recreation Master Plan, how does that report compare to the one that was done in 2014, which we all received a copy of recently?
Your Worship, the plan in 2014 was a facility assessment plan, so we looked at all the indoor facilities, and it wasn't a full master plan.
Okay.
There was a master plan done internally back in 2010 by the town, and that one is right now it's 10 years, so again, we're in that 10-year window. When you trigger it, it's kind of, well, you could do it late this year, like I said, or you can do it in 2020. The intent was to take a look at the full picture in terms of culture, recreation, and parks overall, and facilities and the whole thing included. The alignment with the question on Tony Rose is another one that we would take the report of 2014 and review that at that time, and then take that old piece and work the whole thing together as a full package.
Okay, thank you. Lost you in the queue there, Councillor Peters, sorry. Okay, Councillor Taylor.
I guess I'd just like to say on that, thank you very much, Mr. Osmond, I appreciate that. The whole idea of spending $2.8 million on Tony Rose, which I know is not part of this discussion, but everything dovetails in. At this point, it gives me great angst, and I don't want anyone that's watching tonight to think, please do not translate that to Taylor said, let's close the pool. I did not say that. What I did say, and I've always said, is I want to know all the facts, and I'm really worried about us continuing to spend this money to fix these buildings, and I guess it'd be my wish that we move that forward and get going on it now. If you've read the 2014 report, which I read in 2014, and I reacquainted myself with it again, previous council followed none of those recommendations that were in there. Money was spent on that report, and it would be my intention to follow through on recommendations that are made, and I'd like to see what we need to do.
Yeah, here, here. Yeah. Councillor Post. Oh, Peters, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Hopefully a quick one through to you, to Mr. Osmond. Could you comment on the availability of grants for that master plan? I'm just thinking the cycling and trails plans that are in development currently. There was funding opportunity that either through the province or the federal government. Perhaps you could speak to those opportunities.
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Peters, at this point we have not identified a grant for the master plan. That's something we would definitely look at. If there was opportunity there, we would definitely look at that. Right now we've looked at total funding from the town side. But again, one of the first things we would do, if there's a availability of a grant, we would look for that as well, absolutely.
Councillor, sorry, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Worship. I just think we're putting the cart before the horse. As you said, the facilities master plan was basically ignored by the last council. Should we not look at that, go through that, make decisions on that before we go to a master plan? It just seems to me that, you know, I'm not saying we're closing anything, but if we did lean that way, there's not much good doing a master recreation plan or whatever you want to call it with that still on the table. Just my opinion.
Well, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Osmond, but the two types of reports are a little different. You were talking about just facility and where we are in terms of maintenance and other matters, whereas the recreation master plan is a deeper dive into the future and maybe some changes in demographics, changes in likes and wants for particular sports, and maybe those buildings could be repurposed in some cases, and that would come out of a recreational master plan, correct?
Your Worship, that's correct. The master plan is certainly a very broad document and does touch on facilities and parks and the whole gamut of recreation. You're absolutely correct on a couple of items, Council. The 2014 facility assessment Again, there's a lot of good information in that. Some is still relevant. Some more would have to take another look at because it's 5 years later. Some of the data has changed, demographics have changed, some of the needs and wants, if you would, of the community has changed. Likewise, the parks plan was done back in 2015, I believe, if my memory serves me correctly. And the 2015 plan, again, is an opportunity to take those pieces, put them in front of the overall document, called a master plan, and you get the whole big picture in front of you and make all those types of decisions. I don't disagree with Councillor Taylor when you look at some of the things that are in the facility assessment for Tony Rose are quite clear. But again, it's an opportunity to, before you make a decision to spend any dollars in Tony Rose, to go revisit that plan and see if there's some things that can be looked at now, and if there's some of those things that need to be revisited just to make sure that they're still relevant. If that
Right. And one of the other things that we've introduced here amongst our council members, any discussion, is potential for a YMCA facility. And you know, many municipalities in Southern Ontario have YMCA's, and they're excellent facilities. They provide service, and in some cases are not a drain on the tax dollar either. So I think, you know, a recreational master plan might include looking at something like that as well. We have Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, I'm kind of liking this idea that Councillor Taylor's putting forward about moving the master plan study up into this year, basically because it's been almost a decade since it was done. But what my question is to Mr. Osmond is, you mentioned about doing the study later on in the year, but I'm wondering, because later on this year we'll be starting the 2020 budgets discussions. We won't be waiting to this time next year. So I was thinking that could this master plan with some information help us in making those decisions in the fall for the 2020 budget. That's why I'm really kind of liking this idea. Mr. Osmond, if you're able to give input.
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Sherwood. It would be great in an ideal world if we could get a good start in the next couple of months, but unfortunately these master plans take a little bit of work in terms of putting together the terms of reference and so on, and the document itself and what you're actually looking for. There's also an opportunity where Council can have some input into what exactly goes into that document for a master plan to the consultant world, if you would.
Public consultation, probably.
Public consultation, all those sorts of things. And one of the things you don't want to do is rush it. Because what happens is you get the public consultation, and the engagement of the community is huge. With today's master plans, the public need to have a lot to say, and they need to be revisited more than once. So the more you can do that, the more input you can have from the public, community groups, user groups, and so on and so forth, I think the better you'll have for a great document at the end and good direction at the end for Council to work with. If you had to delay in terms of the budget process to 2021, some of the things in 21 that have been identified now, 21, 22, you still do it over a period of time. The master plan can't be implemented in 1 year. It will take you probably 5 to 10 years to do the whole thing, you know, from a short, medium to long view. So again, I think you're still safe in terms of the time frames of getting things done going forward if you project it into the 2020, 21, 22, 23, and onwards.
Right, and again, Mr. Osmond, a timeline for preparation if in the next 30 days you get the go-ahead here to engage somebody?
Your Worship, the timeline to get things up and running for us would be to turn around. We probably need about 3 months to actually turn it around so that Council got a document they can see before it goes out. And then it would take about, again, a 6-month turnaround to get the thing out into the consultant world working on it. Right. And it'd probably take anywhere from, I wouldn't rush it. I would suggest at least 8 months to finish it. That's in the short term.
So if we say yes now, you're talking about spring 2020 before they would deliver?
That'd be correct.
Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much. Through you, Your Worship, I want to thank Mr. Osmond for that clarity, because again, I think that we have to get this right. And I truly appreciate my other council members here who have put forth this, but you know, I also in my other professional life deal with this type of thing, and I think that when you're dealing with consultants, you want to make sure that you end up going through the process so that we end up benefiting and getting the right information. So thank you very much for your clarity on that.
Okay, so I think we have a motion on, oh, I'm sorry. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think based on the conversation we've had and being reasonable, it was my motion. It would be best just to withdraw. I do appreciate the discussion everybody has, and I'm always thinking about, you know, how do you tie these things together, and that was the spirit of it. I think, again, just as a comment, what gives me angst about tomorrow is there is no way in my right mind I can approve $2.8 million to spend on Tony Rose, given the circumstances that we have now. That means that there is going to be other implications with that, and I fully understand it. But everything, we're in a hurry to find out, right? So things haven't been done, and now we have problems, right? So I don't have a solution for everybody. I just want to let people know I will not be voting for this moving forward.
Okay, so I'm just questioning
I'm
just questioning your withdrawal of this motion because, frankly, I'm totally supportive of getting this started as sooner than later. So I want to maybe...
What I was hearing from Mr. Osmond was it wouldn't make a difference if you put it into 2019 or 2020.
Well, I think if we budget it in 2020, you're talking about 2021 before you get a result back. Mr. Osmond, is that correct? I mean, you're 12 to 18 months start to finish here. Is that right?
That would be correct, Your Worship.
Yeah. So I'm just talking out loud here. I would ask you to put that motion back because I would like to second it and I'd like to call a vote on it because I think it makes sense to me to get this rolling. So if you want to make that, we've got councillors want to comment again. I would second that motion. And then let's have some additional yes, sorry. The motion is to put the recreation master plan in 2019? Correct. Can I just read what I have then? Okay. Yes.
So right now, for that motion, I have the welcome videos out. Cannabis is up to 27,000.
Correct.
Council chambers renovations are out. Development charges study is 5,400. Track loader replace tracks is 5,200. Lane ropes are 6,800. Fountain lights are out.
Yes.
Recreation master plan is in.
Correct.
And that's a total of 65,400.
Okay. Okay, so let's go back to Councillor Taylor. Or sorry, Peters. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I didn't realize the motion was that comprehensive. I was going to move that list of items. I thought yours might have been in isolation, so I'm on board.
Councillor Andrews.
I'm also supporting Councillor Taylor through your worship on having that motion reinstated.
Councillor Sherwood.
And I too, Your Worship, was just going to say that if Councillor Taylor was going to withdraw it, that I was going to put it out there. So we're all on board.
And the cost is reduced because of weed. So, awesome. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor as our clerk had just listed off the items. All in favor? Unanimous. Okay, thank you. 6.16, one-time items for tax levy operating budget in the years 2020 to 2023 be adopted in principle. Anybody want to make a motion? Okay. Okay, go ahead, Councillor Post.
So with that one there, just for clarity with the clerk, the lane ropes at Alder for 2020 would be removed because that was a duplicate item, correct?
Yep.
Yeah. And then the recreation master plan would also be removed. So I would move it as written with those changes in there.
Okay. Do we have a seconder for that motion? Okay, Deputy Mayor McIntosh. Further comment on this motion? Councillor Sherwood.
I just wanted to touch on the salary review. Perhaps a staff member can tell me when the last time was the salary review was done? And is this reoccurring so many years?
Mr. Brown.
Interval.
Your Worship, through you, we just completed the salary review over, I think it was the 16, 17, and we implemented it last year. Our policy is, the town policy, I think it's every 3 years, it could be 4. However, I do not anticipate another salary review being done for a couple of years, probably another 3, maybe even more years out. We will look at it each year and determine if we need it or not, but at this stage, I don't see it for a few more years.
And again, this is adopting in principle, right? So this is not
So this could-
approving this as a expenditure, but adopting in principle. This is 2020 through 2023. Okay, any further comments? Okay, can we have a vote on this motion to accept with those 2 changes, number 6 and number 12 to be removed? All in favor? Okay, passed unanimously, thank you. 6.17, let the 2019 service level change request totaling $9,393 be included in the 2019 tax levy operating budget. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd just like to make a motion that we approve as written by staff.
May I have a seconder? Councillor Peters. Any further comment on this motion? I'll call a vote. All in favor? Pass unanimously. Thank you. 6.18. This is, again, regarding years 2020 through 2023, that these service level changes be adopted in principle. Councillor Taylor.
Same thing. I'd just like to make a recommendation that or motion that we approve as written by staff.
Seconder? Councillor Post. Any further comment? All in favor? Unanimously passed. Thank you. 6.19, and this is going to get a little contentious, I think. We have a number of community grant requests, including, and if staff can put up, oh, you've got it up. Is this the revised one? With the additional 30,000. Okay, so yeah, so we have a total ask here of $102,450 for a number of community organizations. Was budgeted at $35,000. So, as part of this process, each individual community group has to submit an application, and there's criteria, eligibility criteria, which you see listed below there. And in some cases, the organizations have not met the criteria required. Just for some clarity, criteria number 7, Mr. Brennan, maybe you can clarify this. The question is, are funds being received or requested from other levels of government? Does number 7 mean they're asking for them, or they have, you don't know if they're asking for other levels of government?
Your Worship, I think the intent of this was, yeah, are you receiving or have you asked the other levels of government for support and funding?
And so the number 7 under criteria not met means what? It's been asked for, or?
I would say be both, that they're not receiving or they have not asked.
Okay. So they're not receiving.
Correct.
Because, you know, I look at Family Transition Place, for instance, and I know for sure they get money from other government levels of government. That's why it wasn't clear to me if that was, that in fact they've asked for it or not. But okay, this is lots of fun here, folks. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would like to talk to a few things on this list, and the first one is item 2, and it's the Optimist Club of Orangeville. And the greatest thing about being a councillor sitting up here is you get to talk to things that are near and dear to you, and full disclosure, I'm an Optimist member. With all due respect to staff, I have an issue with the criteria not met label, and specifically item 3, and it speaks to the organization having 75% of the members within the community. And I've gone through the membership list to make sure that I was absolutely correct on this, and it is over 75%. So I would like council just to take off point 3 on the Optimist Club of Orangeville. And I'd also like to provide some background, and that is lights each year at Christmas in the park cost $4,500. Extension cords, you'll laugh, but there'll be over $10,000 in extension cords that are out there. The labor to do Christmas in the park would never be accomplished by town staff. If you didn't have a volunteer organization doing it, you will not have Christmas in the park. And then I'll move off of the Optimist Club for a minute. I've watched council for quite a few years, as many of us have up here. And I think back a couple of years ago, and there was a big scuffle about this page in particular. And my good friend Scott Wilson, Councillor Wilson, was fighting for inclusion of these community clubs. I don't believe that, on balance, this is a spot that we should be fighting about. These are community people who are providing events. For the most part, they have not had increases in the amount of money that they have. The things that they do for the community are particularly important, and sometimes dollars versus the output are quite different. So I think this is potentially an ugly discussion. I won't make a motion, but if I did, I would make a motion that we passed. But I'll just leave it as a comment for now and let everybody else have their say as well.
Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Through you to, I would assume, the clerk that accepts the applications of the grants? No. Okay, I'll ask my question and then we can figure out who it is from there. I don't want to be the rotten egg in the party here, but number 8 of the eligibility criteria states that the deadline must be reached by September 30th. Having reviewed these applications, I see that 2 of these applicants, they are dated 2017, and that there was no applications made for 2018. If we look at page 165 and 177, if I'm reading the dates correctly, these are previous year applications and not current. So not that I don't want to provide them funding, it doesn't appear to me that there's been current applications made by those 2 organizations.
Right.
And I just think if we're sticking to criteria, 2? 165 and 177, so one is,
Orangeville District Horticultural Society.
and the seniors, the Orangeville and District Seniors Citizen Center, those dated applications are from the previous year.
Is it possible that staff has put the wrong application in, Mr. Brennan?
Or have they been put on a behalf when they haven't applied?
Your Worship, I guess anything is possible.
Right.
Unfortunately, the staff member who's done the vetting on those is no longer with us. I can tell you from experience, I think some of, there may be some of the requesters on this list, or people on, or organizations on this list that has been taken as a standard on the list for years, I think. The Horticultural Society may be one. It's a very small ask, and I think they are just repeat requests year after year, which may answer why some are 2017.
Right.
And again, I guess the questions asked, maybe why there's no under the criteria, if they fully meet them or not.
So just, Your Worship.
Go ahead.
Just to follow up, I mean, it's not that I'm not in support of these people. I just want it to be very mindful and very clear that the process here is that we are to receive them in a deadline, because we could have somebody come on later on and ask for money, and we can be told, we could tell them, no, you did not reach the deadline. So even though we can keep them on here, if that is the wishes of council, you know, I don't want to say let's take them off as a way of disciplining them, but we have to be mindful that if we to give them any funding, that they do know that there is a deadline to apply for concurrent years. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm trying to be sympathetic for the low amount, but at the same time, there's a process here.
Right. Also, I'm wondering, Are all of these applicants, any of them new? This Headwaters Communities in Action, for instance, is that a new ask this year? Is anybody new?
Your Worship, through you, I know on the list that number 12, the Royal Canadian Legion ask, is new this year.
Yep.
The Blues and Jazz came in last year, and the council provided the grant, and it's on again this year. I would have to go back and check. We would need some time to go back to see what was approved last year in the budget, and then compare it.
Okay.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would support all the items on this list, including the Royal Canadian Legion for $30,000. However, number 11, we were just talking about it, Headwaters Community in Action. I read through that a number of times, and it looks to me more something that could go to the county level. It's more of a county function. All the members live out in the county. I didn't even see anybody in town that's on the committee, which is irrelevant, but it seems to be more of a Dufferin County thing. So I would suggest not that one, but them going to the county looking for some funds rather than the town of Orangeville. Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting on this application. It says the funds will support the local food club program delivery. What is the local food club? I mean, okay. Yes, Councillor Peters. Sorry.
I think I might be next anyway.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will point out that the staff recommendation under option 3 was not to grant that one, so there is the option not to. But with respect to the food club, HFFA, I forget the exact, Headwaters Farming Alliance, and there's another F in there. They have a food bag program that they offer students in elementary schools with local recipes and locally produced produce and bakery items and that sort of thing. It's done on a monthly basis, and it's been quite a success locally. And I believe they are also looking to expand their programs to children's educational, culinary education, that sort of thing. So I think that sort of covers what that food portion is.
And you're saying schools in Orangeville proper are,
yes. I believe
served by this?
The number might be wrong, but I believe there may be up to 5 schools locally, and although they do act at a regional level. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Can I jump in with
my
other comments, or did you want to finish?
Yeah, please.
Okay, certainly. Yeah, this is sort of a contentious issue, and with respect to Councillor Sherwood and Taylor, they are sort of small amounts, but I would be open to looking at the total dollar value allocated in future years. I would be open to looking at the criteria in future years, but given that this process was established and that we have applications that are counting on them, or have gone through the rigor of the original application, I sort of came up with an option 4, not to complicate things, but you'll notice under option 3, once you prorate the $35,000 allocation to all of the various successful applications, if you will, if you top each of those up, they're all getting about 90% kind of thing. So if you top those up, it's only about an extra $5,000 or $6,000. So I would propose, I suppose, an option 4 that took the 6 successful grants and topped them up to their full amounts. And then we could start discussions on what this program looked like in the future as a separate discussion.
Councillor Andrews.
All right, thank you very much, and through you, Your Worship. Thank you, Councillor Peters, for your point there on a couple of those items. Going back a couple of steps here, both with Deputy Mayor McIntosh and also Councillor Sherwood. I think the criteria piece that Councillor Sherwood pointed out is one that I think is very important, and and I understand and respect the community groups that anticipate that they're going to receive some funding on an annual basis, but we do have to be very clear about the process, and I think that it's very important that that is echoed, and I certainly respect Mr. Brennan's point earlier that a staff member that would have been here to maybe provide some clarity is no longer, but moving forward, I think that that's a critical point. And I'm trying to remember exactly what Deputy Mayor McIntosh pointed out earlier, because again, we've had so much dialogue that we all seem to. That's correct. Thank you very much. Yes, go to the county. I think in that particular point, I absolutely agree, and we'll end up supporting his
Yeah,
point
the
on that.
HCIA
Yes.
to the county.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, Councillor Taylor.
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Peters. Again, it's our second meeting, it's third meeting for some. Was that a motion that you made with yours, or was that a comment? Is that on the table? Do we have a motion? No. No, just a comment? Okay.
Comment.
Okay, thank you. Since there's not, then we'll just move on to my thoughts, and that is, again, such a sensitive area, and I'm uncomfortable even speaking about it, but I just feel like we can't let it go. I think about Shannon McGrady being here with Bravery Park, sitting in front of council budget session after budget session and fundraising, and did a very noble thing and has a beautiful park behind Alder Street Arena. And then we hear from the Royal Canadian Legion who wants something similar. And believe me, all apologies to everyone in the Legion, but I would struggle to understand the difference between the two things, and I'm certain that there is, so I apologize for my ignorance. I just, under what we have done in the past versus what we're being asked today, I have issues with point 12. If Ms. McGrady has to go through and fundraise for something so noble, perhaps other organizations should have to do the same.
Right. I share some of your thoughts, Councillor Taylor. I did an inventory, and you know, many of us here and in this room have been to our beautiful Remembrance Day ceremony. We have Alexander Park with a cenotaph and other monuments there. We have Island Lake Cemetery, which has a monument or cairn to the war dead. Our Legion, we support them by a tax abatement for their facility. You know, we've got the Bravery Park project going. I just, you know, I'm struggling with where does it stop and end, because you know, $30,000, and I saw the design, and you know, again, aesthetics is something that we all have our input on, but I'm struggling with that kind of spend on again. We have a number of monuments to our war dead, and we're all supportive of it, and we're all supportive of the Legion. So I would like to maybe have that deferred maybe to next year, and we need to, I think we need to tighten this up and really be, you know, deliver messages to people about the application process, and that we're not going to be, you know, allow a soft approach anymore. We have to be serious about this. And there's a couple other comments that you know, I love all our service clubs. I'm a member of one of them. Rotary Club of Orangeville. The profit from the Rib Fest is in the order of $80,000 on the weekend. This is a little different than Councillor Taylor's Casey Gardens ask. If the Rotary Club on their balance or their income statement says $73,000 versus $80,000, I think it's still a pretty successful weekend. And the other one that, you know, as much as we all love the Orangeville Blues and Jazz Festival, I'm struggling there. This is the most successful, one of the most successful music festivals in Ontario, and I'm just, you know, if they can't make the ends meet, it's I've never seen their financials. I don't think it was very complete here, what they submitted. However, it is the Blues and Jazz Festival, so and everybody loves it. So maybe I better back off on that one. Councillor Peters.
Sure, I would just circle back, I suppose, and I'll officially make the motion, I suppose, of an option 4, which would be, again, in the interest of respecting the process that staff has implemented for these grants and the rules that existed at the time of the applications, notwithstanding perhaps a stamping error on the date. Or, you know, I don't want to get into speculation there, but I would move that the six grant applications that were approved in option 3 be topped up to their asking amount to add a modest amount to the 35,000. Perhaps we could get that number from the CAO or the deputy treasurer. Approve those, and then again, I think as a group we would look at the eligibility and the budget in future years, but in the interest of getting this motion moved forward.
Councillor Taylor.
With all the professionalism I can muster, that gives me great angst and makes me very upset that we would do such a thing. I don't think that that is a good idea for all of these service clubs that we have in the community. And candidly, and it's just touching something that's emotional for me, to take away money from the Optimist Club who's putting something on and in such a significant way is the wrong thing to do. We should not be touching that money by any set. And just as further information, everybody, I did reach out to Larry Kurtz because I too had some questions about his note, and I'd just like to read it for everybody because I can't do it justice. But for the economic impact was $1.3 million annually generated for the local economy. There's $80,000 spent on local suppliers, close to 200 volunteers. We hire more than 200 local musicians, volunteer-run, not-for-profit organization, big tourism draw, 35,000 people in attendance, 7 times awarded one of the top 100 festivals and events in Ontario. I don't think this is a good idea to be playing with. So I will not be supporting the motion.
Okay. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Peters. I'm trying to visualize your option 4, and one of the things that you're basing your decision on granting the 6 is meeting the eligibility criteria. And if that's the case, that would remove the Horticulture Society and the Senior Center because they did not meet the deadline eligibility. So that actually brings those down from 6 to 4. That's why I'm just getting clarification.
Before we go further, maybe Councillor Peter made a motion here, I believe, correct? So can we have a seconder for that motion? We do not have a seconder for that motion. Okay, so so I think we need to continue the discussion here. Councillor Taylor.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve all at the option 1 rate with the exception of number 11 and number 12, which would get 0.
Okay, do we have a seconder on that motion? Councillor Andrews. We need to have some further discussion. Councillor Peters.
Thank you. I'll just keep it brief. I think in the interest of consistency across the applications, we're either sticking to the criteria met or we're not. As the application came to the town, just to speak briefly to Councillor Sherwood's comment, again, when this chart was prepared, I'm under the assumption that the staff that went through it checked for all the eligibility. I guess they could have reached out to those clubs and said, would you like to reapply with the same application to save time? Again, I'm counting on the judgment of staff to have filled out the chart as we see it correctly. And if we're going to ignore the criteria, then we should include HCIA. And if we're going to stick to the criteria, it would only be the 6 that were presented. So I would not support the motion.
Okay. Any further discussion on the motion? Councillor Sherwood.
Can I have an update of what the amount would be, please, based on this? If you're saying option 1, except number 11 and 12?
$61,050. Councillor Peters.
Post.
Oh, sorry, Post. I'm sorry.
Just a friendly amendment. I would be happy to support the recommendation of Councillor Taylor, but it does appear that he's taking out Headwaters Community in Action based on criteria number 3. which I agree with Councillor Peters that if we're sticking to eligibility criteria, we can't take out one without taking out others. So if the criteria that we're looking at for Headwaters Community in Action is the fact that 75% of their membership is not comprised of Town of Orangeville residents, then I feel that we also have to remove others that fall into that category. I know that you've recognized that the Optimist Club of Orangeville does not fall under that criteria, but I think that would be something that we would have to look at and maybe defer till we can get clarification on that.
Okay, so,
Oh, apologies. Councillor Peters has just pulled up the form, and it does show that they're 100% on the Optimist Club.
right. Okay.
So that would remove that criteria. So if we're sticking that those that have the eligibility criteria not met of number 7, which is receiving funds or requesting funds from other levels of government, then I think if we're removing Headwaters Community in Action, we would also have to remove Harry Posner's ask of the $900.
Okay, so at this point, we have a motion on the floor to accept the first 10 items on this list in full, totaling $61,050 by my count. Is that correct or not? Yeah. No further, let's have a vote. All in favor of that? Okay, that motion is carried. I'm sorry? Those opposed? Sorry. Okay. Post, Peters, and McIntosh are opposed. Contentious. Sorry. It's you know, we want to support our local groups, and we welcome the Legion and HCIA in the future to come back. Thank you. Okay, let's go to 6.1.10. That the unallocated surpluses be allocated as recommended. And in Mr. Brennan's presentation, he noted that there's unallocated funds in 2016 and 2017. The treasurer had recommended how to apportion that money. I'm sorry. You're right, it was. Okay, sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. Councillor Post or Peters, did you want to talk? Sorry.
Yeah, I know that one's been taken care of, but one of the items that I wanted to touch base on, and I'm not sure where the appropriate time to do it is the committee piece. As Mr. Brennan brought up in his presentation, there's been $100,000 allocated towards committees, and we have, as a council, we've consolidated a lot of those committees and made some changes. So I believe we have an opportunity to save a substantial amount of money by redistributing that money. And removing some, but I did have one question when I was looking at the chart through the budget, and I'm not sure who's appropriate to ask this to. One of the committees labeled emergency had a budget of $10,000, and I'm not sure what that is. If somebody can clarify that one.
Councillor Andrews. Oh, sorry.
No,
Yes, Mr. Brennan.
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Post. The Emergency Management Committee was a committee that was formed a number of years ago. There is a requirement for an Emergency Management Committee. There will be another one this year. And the funds that was in there was $10,000. It was to look at things as continuity plans, emergency egress plans, or emergency management plans for facilities. We also looked at a generator that we have installed over the years from our EOC, from an emergency perspective. So,
thank you. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. And again, to Mr. Brennan, just so for clarification, this is tied to the County of Dufferin's emergency management team, and or is this the Town of Orangeville's strategy to support some of those activities?
So again, through you, Your Worship, this team itself would be for the Town of Orangeville. And of course, we have a joint emergency management team with the county. The emergency advisor, Mr. Steve Murphy, acts on that committee and as advisor as a whole for our emergency management plan. But this committee is a sort of an emergency management committee that is focused on the town itself.
Councillor Post or Peters? Post?
Yeah.
Okay.
So with that being said, that is something that you recommend that we will need going forward?
Your Worship, I would say yes.
With that same level of budget, with the $10,000 budget?
Your Worship, again through you, at this stage I would say yes at the 10,000, depending on what the province brings towards us on for emergency management and what our committees will see. If we require additional funds, we will come back to council and clarify and justify it accordingly.
Okay. Councillor Post.
If I could continue then, I'd like to make a motion that we change around some of the budget allocations for the committees, specifically to change Access Orangeville to 25,000. It was previously 20,000, but it now also combines the seniors and age-friendly as part of it, which had a budget of 14,300. And I think by combining the two at 25,000, we should be able to get a lot accomplished. The arts and culture, I would propose dropping to $6,000 because we are just doing a review at this time. So I would like to leave that as even a $6,000 perhaps reserve to see what needs to move forward when we do move into that. I would propose keeping the emergency committee then at $10,000. Heritage Orangeville also at $8,500. The honors committee at $2,000. And the Sustainability Action Team at $25,000, which was previously at $28,000, and that would include the Communities in Bloom portion as well. So then we're deleting Communities in Bloom from having its own budget, Events Committee from having its budget, Seniors from having its own budget, and Recreation from having a budget. So I can do the math there quickly. I had it done before I added the emergency management in, but which would be a total, I guess, of 68,000 if my math is correct, instead of the 102,542 that it was at.
Okay, so you're making a motion to adjust our committee funding?
Yeah, which would then save us $34,000, $34,542. Of course, yeah. $25,000 towards Access Orangeville / Age Friendly, $6,000 towards the Arts and Culture Committee, $10,000 towards the Emergency Management Committee, $8,500 towards Heritage, $2,000 towards the Honors Committee, and $25,000 for OSAT / Communities in Bloom. And I'm just looking for a seconder for that motion.
I would like to second that. Continuing our conversation, Councillor Taylor, or Andrews, sorry.
That's okay. Through you, Your Worship, Councillor Post, I do want to thank you very much for the mathematics in that particular piece, echoing very similar to some of the observations I made, and I will certainly endorse the motion.
Very good. Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sure people saw this one coming, but I'd like to discuss the OSAT budget as proposed by Councillor Post. Especially with sort of the inclusion of Communities in Bloom, it'll be a transition year for them in more than one respect. A loss of leadership and a combination of committees. Well, two things. First, you know, one of the things we don't have in this town yet is the sustainability plan, which of course is in the works and should be implemented hopefully within the year. We also have someone coming on board through a grant for a climate change position that will help the town. But in these transition years, as we go from OSAT as a committee to the town perhaps taking on a more active role in the sustainability area, the one thing that we may want to look at in the future is essentially an environmental reserve outside of capital and operating. And essentially what OSAT acts as in the meantime is that environmental reserve. And so these are monies that are dedicated to those measures, to the events and the plantings and the infrastructure as they relate to the environment. And, you know, we're not talking about a ton of money, a difference between these items, but OSAD is one of those committees that really turns those dollars into many more through grants and that sort of thing. So, you know, the 28 from last year was turned into almost 200 by the time you took into, you know, some of those grants and such. So I'd like to give that community the ample opportunity to have funding available for the pursuit of those grants and those initiatives. And especially with the addition of Communities in Bloom, I'd rather see that number at perhaps 30 or 35, but I know there's a motion on the floor, so I would leave it at that.
You were at what level there?
I would be happy to add to that if that's necessary, and I would take that as a friendly amendment to the motion by, if we could make it 30,000 for, which would make our numbers, sorry? Yeah, which would make our numbers 81,000 for committees.
No.
81,500, right? If we added 5,000? Sorry?
Sorry?
81,500.
81.5.
So I would be happy with that. And again, we're still saving a substantial amount of money over what was there. We're still looking at saving $23,000.
Okay. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, so while we are reviewing committees, I would like to jump in for the Heritage Committee. And currently it sits at a budget of $8,500. And I would hope that we could friendly amend that to add an additional $1,500 and bring it up to $10,000. I'm just thinking more along the lines that we may be looking at some kind of downtown revitalization. There could be an opportunity here to be displaying, you know, blade signs along on Broadway, and we may be able to have to assist some people. Possibly they may come for funding. My concern here with the committee here is I know I'm asking for it to go to 10,000 and not really fully justifying why, because I don't see how much we've actually spent, and I would kind of like to have seen, okay, this is how much Heritage ended up spending possibly in 2017 or 18 to know what their projects were. But at this time, I'm just wondering if we are going with committees, could we possibly consider upping that by $1,500 to $10,000?
Another friendly amendment, adding $1,500 onto that. Okay. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship, and to again kind of jump onto Councillor Sherwood's point, would we be able to know, and again, I don't want to put the Treasury Department on
the spot?
Point, yeah, thank you very much. It's getting a little late in the evening, but would we know what the surplus would be in any of these committees? You know, is there a surplus typically carried over, or is there a surplus declared in any of the committee activity?
Your Worship, through you, we don't have that number right now. We could look it up tonight, tomorrow morning, and probably bring it back tomorrow evening if that's, you know, and we can again readjust if that's the case.
I think that would be very helpful for us in making some of these decisions. And again, I certainly echo my fellow councillors who you know, are certainly supporting a variety of different committees, and I respect their points that have been made, but I think that that would be very helpful for us to historically take a look at what has happened over the past fiscal year, and it would help us to make some decisions, I think.
So, is that a suggestion to defer this item till tomorrow night? Is that what your thoughts are?
I would think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
She'll have a motion to defer this until tomorrow night. Okay. Councillor Andrews, seconded by Councillor Sherwood. All in favor? Okay, thank you. So, looks like... Okay, can we just maybe take a 5-minute adjournment here, or we have a motion? Do we need one? I don't know. We're going to declare recess. We'll back in Can we reconvene our meeting, please? We're at agenda item 6.2.1. That inflation items totaling $97,544 be included in the 2019 water and wastewater operating budget. Do we have a motion? I'm sorry? Are we? Okay. Sorry. Okay, we're going to back up. So 61.11, recommendation that the 2019 net tax levy operating budget, excluding net transfers, of $30,518,000 be approved. So do we know where our net is at this point, Mr. Brennan, or?
Your Worship, no, we don't know the net at this point, but if we could change the wording there to say approximately $30,518,000. And then when we come back with the final numbers, when our treasurer goes through all the final numbers, we'll bring it back and we can have an exact motion ready for the bylaw when we pass it.
Okay, so are you suggesting we defer this to tomorrow night?
No, Your Worship. I'm suggesting that we just use the word approximately in that 30, and that way if there's a little plus or minus somewhere because some of the moves, we can adjust it accordingly, and that would be reflective of the motions of council.
Pardon me. All right. we're okay, let's take Mr. Taylor first. Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. That was going to be my question as well. Like, I know we can't get to the exact amount, but in principle, this is correct. So my motion would be to receive as written with the advice given by Mr. Brennan.
Councillor Post.
I, for one, and I'm not sure where everybody else is at, I'm not really comfortable with the word approximately in the budget. And we've also deferred a couple of items to tomorrow night with the committees and things of those sorts. So what impact will that have on it? And Mr. Brennan, can we skip ahead and skip this item and move on through the rest of them?
Madam Clerk. Go ahead.
Your Worship, through you, in past years we have use the word approximately, or we have come back with the firm final numbers before we pass a bylaw, because that what it allows is our Treasury Department to go back and do a double check of all the numbers, change the directions of council, and it just allows us to firm up everything in one nice package, and then, you know, when we bring the budget bylaw, it's there and clear. So if council wants to defer it, depending on the changes that are made tomorrow night, we may have to defer it again before we come back with the final number down to the dollar and cent.
Councillor Post.
Would it be possible for us to see kind of where we're at so far based on those? Do we have a calculator on the go of what we've got so far?
Again, Your Worship, through you, yes, we can. And what we can do, we can flip over to the tally sheet. I'm looking at the Deputy Treasurer to see if she is, the Acting Treasurer, to see if she's ready and if we can bring that up and start showing to council the impact of some of the moves.
Actually, it's more for the media here, actually. Yes, Mr. Brennan.
Your Worship, what we're showing here is our first draft for our tally sheet for the changes. There's a couple items on here that council will have to address. One, we've put it on the list for council's consideration of the $100,000 highlighted in red for an OPP costing to consultants. We're estimating at this stage about $100,000, and if council, we have talked about potentially a consultant reviewing the findings and looking at the numbers and also the level of services that potentially a OPP police force could offer this town. And so if council is still considering going to consult, bringing in a consultant to review that and to make recommendations to council, we will require some funding. The second thing, there is a consultant for a groundwater monitoring program, and I would ask Mr. Jones to speak on it and as we move forward. Is there anything else?
Mr. Jones.
Through your worship, to Mr. Brennan, I believe that the groundwater monitoring program was not under tax dollars. That should be funded by water and wastewater and therefore shouldn't impact this tally.
Very well. Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just while we're waiting, I'll just offer my comments on the motion at hand, I suppose. Given the fact that we are deferring a couple and no one's had really a chance to bring up new business, sounds like there's a couple other things we may be missing. I'm not sure it's worth making the motion to say approximately if it's just going to be updated. So, if it's possible to defer, that would be my vote.
Councillor Sherwood.
I was just going to ask if we could see the descriptions, because on what I'm seeing here is completely cut off on the left side. I can't see any of the descriptions here. Like, there's something that says taxpayers' impact, I guess.
Mr. Brennan, the costing, OPP costing, so you've identified consultants and that's a rough idea, or where did you come up with that number?
Your Worship, I didn't, but I know we had some calls around before. We certainly haven't gone out and asked for direct quotes or anything at this stage. I think our former treasurer looked at Midland and those places and what they were looking at, and this was the ballpark that they were asking to carry out the consultant's review. Of course, that may change depending on the level of review we are requesting from the consultant.
Right. Okay. So, were you making a motion then on deferral? Is that what your thoughts were? Sorry? Yeah. Okay. Madam Clerk. Okay. So it sounds like council would prefer to let this go till tomorrow night. Is that correct? Councillor, hang on. Councillor Sherwood.
Your Worship, would we actually be discussing this tomorrow night or our next budget meeting, which would be on the 29th? Because tomorrow night is capital. That's why I thought we would be going to the next budget meeting, which isn't until the 29th. Am I correct?
Mr. Brennan, maybe you can give some guidance here.
Your Worship, through you, if council wishes, we can certainly put out an addendum, a revised agenda for tomorrow's meeting and cover it off tomorrow.
Okay. Hold on. Yes, Councillor Andrew.
Thank you very much through you, Your Worship. I would also concur with Councillor Sherwood. From a sequence point of view, we have a very detailed discussion tomorrow night regarding capital, and to have some of these important items also included may impede some of our decisions, and so holding off to, we have other budget meetings that are scheduled, and I think that it would be appropriate for us to hold off. It will also give town staff maybe an opportunity to provide us with some of the information that is certainly needed in this particular case, and maybe some others that may arise before this evening is over.
Okay. So, it's Councillor Sherwood.
Oh, I'm still on. Okay, so yeah, I guess what I'm asking then is that we stick to the plan, and our plan is to concentrate on capital tomorrow and go back to the our next scheduled budget to review all of these changes.
Okay. Yeah? Okay. All right. Then let's do that. Okay, so let's move along then. We've got Mr. Taylor.
If I may, everything was moving a little fast there. The Excel spreadsheet that was in front of us, it showed a 0.99, but it had those monies in it still, and you'd remove some, and it didn't change. Would it not? Could you just share what we're at right now, through you, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, could you please pull that up and show us the tally sheet?
It was 0.99, and then some monies were removed, and I was thinking it would drop by
The
a third.
groundwater monitoring.
Yeah,
every 300 was to be taken
every
out.
350,000 is a percentage point, right? So we should have dropped by 0.3 and been around 0.6. I was thinking we were 0.5.
And so was that, again, not impacting the tax levy previously, or was?
Your Worship, that was correct. It was identified under wastewater, so it did not have any impact on the tax levy. If it pleases council, what I suggest to do, maybe we go through the rest of our changes in the agenda package itself and go through those recommendations, and maybe at the end of that we can bring up this tally sheet to so that we can review with council to see where we're at in a projection for tax levy.
Fair enough. I think we can do that. Thank you. Okay, so again, 6.1.12, this is a recommendation that the projection for 2020 and 2023 is adopted in principle. May I have a motion? Deputy Mayor McIntosh, may I have a seconder? Councillor Post, all in favor? Okay, so 6.112 is passed unanimously. Now we're on to 6.21. Inflation items totaling $97,544 be included in the 2019 water and wastewater operating budget. May I have a motion? Councillor Post, seconder. Councillor Peters. Any comment or discussion on this item? No? Okay, we'll call a vote. All in favor? Unanimous. 6.22, recommendation that 2018 one-time items totaling $125,000 be removed from the 2019 water operating budget. May I have a motion? Deputy Mayor McIntosh, seconded by Councillor Sherwood. All in favor? 2.2 is passed. 6.23, recommendation that 2019 one-time items totaling $130,000 be included in the 2019 water and wastewater operating budget. May I have a motion? Councillor Sherwood, seconder. Councillor Post. Any comments on this agenda item? All in favor? Unanimous. 6.24, recommendation that one-time items for the water and wastewater operating budget for the years 2020 to 23 be adopted in principle. May I have a motion? Councillor Andrews, seconder. Councillor Peters. Any further discussion? All in favor? Oh, I'm sorry. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship, to Mr. Jones. I see the digital logbook was removed as a one-time item this year, but being brought back next year. Can you maybe explain that to me?
Yes, Mr. Jones.
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Sherwood, you're absolutely right. We did carry an allowance in 2018 to implement digital logbooks. However, prior to spending the money and doing that work, we determined that there were some upgrades necessary to our SCADA system that are also identified here as number 22. And if we had moved ahead with the digital logbooks in 2018, we would have needed to redo that work. So we deferred that until after these SCADA improvements are completed and expect to complete that digital logbook work in 2020.
Okay, all in favor? Unanimous, thank you. Item 6.2.5, recommendation that the 2019 water and wastewater operating budgets as presented be approved. We have a motion. Councillor Post, second. Councillor Taylor. Any comments on this agenda item? All in favor? Unanimous. And 6.26, recommendation that the 2020 to 2023 water and wastewater operating budgets as presented be approved. Councillor, motion from Councillor Peters, second Councillor Taylor. Any, Mr. Brennan.
Your Worship, can we get the wording changed there to be approved in principle?
I don't see why not. Okay, we will do that in principle. Any further comment on this item? I just have one question for Mr. Jones. So, can you just explain this fluctuation? You know, looking at money going to reserves, 35%, 4.23, 10%, 3%. Can you, for us laymen, give us a little explanation as to why this fluctuates at such a dramatic amount? Mr. Jones.
Certainly, Your Worship. The way that the water and wastewater budgets operate is that they are both separate self-funded utilities. So the money that we collect under water rates can only go to fund water activities, and under wastewater rates can only fund wastewater activities. So for each of those, we collect sufficient monies to cover off not only our operating costs on an annual basis, but capital works within the capital forecast, as well as life cycle costs. At some point, every sewer and every water main in town will need to be replaced, and we need to ensure that there are funds for that. So when we redo our water and wastewater study, which we will be doing this year, that'll set the rates for the next 5 years, they take into account the 5-year operating budget as well as the capital forecast and life cycle costs, and look at annualizing those costs and determining what we need to collect in terms of revenue. So when we see these numbers here, revenue should always exceed our expenses in the operating budget, since the money that we are getting from rates is to fund more than just the operating budget, but is to fund the capital works as well. In this particular case, we see an increase in the amount of revenue that we'll be receiving from water and wastewater rates in 2019. There's an increase over 2018, and there's actually a decrease in some of our expenditures, as we've seen a little bit earlier in some of the earlier slides. And those two items combined result in a greater difference between between the revenue and expenses, which is what has resulted in this fairly large increase in the transfer to reserves.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion on that motion? Can I call a vote, please? All in favor? Unanimous, thank you. 6.311. Net operating budgets by department. Oh, this is not a recommendation. Are we done here? Thank heavens. Okay, Madam Clerk.
The recommendation on that is just that those items be received as information.
Okay. Can I have a motion, please, on that item? Councillor Taylor, seconder, Councillor Post. All in favor? We receive those items. Thank you. So just going back to our agenda here. I guess that is any new business, I guess. Yes, Mr. Brennan, I'm sorry?
Your Worship, we are ready to go through the tally sheet if you wish at this time.
Okay. Would you please present that? Thank you.
The other way.
So 0.99, that's it? That's the number at this point?
At this point, Your Worship, we'll just run through it. We're trying to align it so that some members of council can see it on their display.
Yes.
I think some of it is being cut off by... Okay.
Any questions, councillors? Okay. Is that what you were looking for, is the tally? Or you had some other items? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Very good. Councillor Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I know we're just about done here this evening. I guess my confusion would be is I see the 100,000 in there for the consultant. Is that something we talk about here now, or is that something later on?
I know Deputy
so,
Mayor
I'd like to talk
McIntosh had a comment on it.
If so, I'd like to talk to it. If not, we'll table
Yeah,
it for another time.
please, no, go ahead.
So, you know, as someone who ran on the idea of pursuing all the facts, intuitively you'd think that I would want a consultant to come in here and tell us all the great things that we need to know. I have changed my thinking, and I will reserve the right to change my thinking as we go along. I believe firmly that this group can do this on our own with consultation with town staff and the Orangeville Police and the OPP and consultation from our citizens. I do not feel good about $100,000 in this budget. The math on that would be, you know, it's 0.29, 0.3 of our budget. We'd be sitting at a 0.66, a 0.69, something like that, if that wasn't there. I have all the confidence in this group of people to be able to do this without having a consultant. I don't think we should have that money in our budget. Election speech over.
Thank you. Sorry, Deputy Mayor McIntosh.
My election speech starts. I have no issue with taking it out. My question is to the treasurer or anybody that can answer it through you, Your Worship. Can we take that out of reserves if we decide at some point in time we need that?
Your Worship, through you to Deputy Mayor McIntosh, that is correct. And actually, I was just asking our acting treasurer, and that is an option for council is to look at a reserve to fund it going forward.
And I have no issue taking that out.
Okay. So we have a motion from Councillor Taylor to remove that item. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Post, all in favor? Okay, let's remove the OPP costing consultants cost, please. So what are we down to there? 0.71? Okay. Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just wondering if there were any other highlighted items on there that didn't make their way into the agenda, perhaps that should be brought up for discussion. It doesn't have to be tonight, I guess, but we don't want to miss any of these items moving forward. So, you know, we happen to catch it on the screen there, but I guess I would ask Mr. Brennan if there are any other major items that were perhaps added that weren't captured in the agenda.
And that was the 357. Okay. Your Worship, through you, no, the only other item that we would like to point out is line item number 20, property tax adjustment, and it's a decrease of $19,850, which was actually a Form 357, but it's just been a reduction on our taxes. We used to have to pay the tax from the old restaurant sports bar at the Alta Street Recreation Center. Since it was a leased property, it is no longer leased. It is owned and controlled by the town, so we do not have to pay that tax. So we just want to show that in here to be clear where the money is coming from.
All right. Okay. Very good. Thank you. Any further questions that councillors may have of staff right now? Yes. Councillor Taylor.
Just making sure I can read the sheet. So I can do the math on my own, but where do I see the amount? So the 0.71 is, you know, it's approximately $280,000. It would be my math, but I don't see that on here. I'm just curious. Maybe it's less, 260. But where do I see that on the Excel spreadsheet that we're viewing? And why I asked, just while I've got control, I'm thinking about tomorrow night and kind of what that could mean for all of us as we're figuring out a budget. So if you're following along at home, you know, there's still an opportunity to have further discussion about what the tax rate would be for next year. This is by no means final at 0.71. I just don't,
So
where do I see that?
what's the 762,487 number?
Your Worship, through you, that is the reduction from that 1.44 million in the net tax levy increase that was projected for the 4.31% or the 4+%. So from that, we're reducing it by close to 50% at 762,487 by the actions taken tonight by council.
Right. Okay. Well, we recognize that 1% is 350,000, so yeah, it's in the range of $250,000. That's correct. Councillor, hang on, just a sec. Okay, Councillor Sherwood, I'm sorry.
Yes, I'd like to bring my fellow councillors, if you could look to page 60, please, of the operating budget by department under corporate allocations. And the tax write-offs was under the reorganization budget last year was 400,000, and this year they're asking for it to go 500,000, 100,000, which is a 25% increase. And I would look to the CAO, Mr. Brennan, to maybe explain to council the reasoning for the 25%, because I know this is assessments that are under appeal. There could be some large businesses, for example, Shoppers Drug Marts or Canadian Tires that are under appeal. Doesn't necessarily mean that they will be favorable to get refunds, but at the same time, there is legislation that allows us to put timelines of refunds into the next year if we're getting close to budget. So if you're looking for a little bit of money, I'm wondering if we could stick to the 400,000, or maybe Mr. Brennan can explain why he would like to keep it at the $500,000.
Mr. Brennan.
Your Worship, through you, and this has been an ongoing thing, to be quite honest. As with the previous council who made the moves for the 1% and the 1% of capital and capital reserves to try to close the infrastructure gap that was recognized in the town. We've also been warned over the years from Impact and of course from the province and stuff is to be ready for a lot of these assessment appeals. So a lot of our big box stores through Ontario have been challenging the appeals for the amount of property tax they are running. Impact is working diligently with them, trying to come to a resolve. But in fairness to the owners of these properties, there is no deterrent from once an appeal is heard not to go back and reapply. So you're getting these applies year after year. We've been warned and advised in many financial seminars and financial advice and from Impact it's not a matter of when it's going to happen or if it's going to happen, it's a matter of when. In some of these reassessments, we could be looking at very large dollar values. What the council of the previous day had done under the recommendations of staff and from our treasurer was to try to build a reserve for this type of payment. As an example, I think it was in 2017 we paid around $680,000 in some of these write-offs. This year to date, I think it's only around 68 or 70,000. But the money that is left in those numbers or those reserves, those funds, they are put into a reserve. So we're trying to build that reserve. So in future years, when we're hit with a big $2-3 million bill, there is a dollar value there. The 120-day that you have to pay the assessment, that's 120 days after you are served with the assessment. It doesn't mean that we can go into the next year. So again, instead of having the high and lows in the fluctuation of paying and potentially impact on our tax levy, what our treasurer has recommended in the past, and which is very much the same in other municipalities, is to try to get a reserve in place so that you can stabilize those type of payments and not have the massive impacts on your tax levy going forward. And that's the purpose why we started with a couple $100,000 a few years ago. We've been trying to build, and this year, because of the big payments a couple years ago, we thought it would be best and wise financial planning to ask for that amount of money.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brennan. Just a secondary question on that. Do you have any idea how much money is in the reserves, or are they depleted and we're trying to build up reserves?
Yes,
Your
Mr.
Worship,
Brennan.
if you give us a couple seconds, and our Deputy Treasurer is going to try to find that out for us.
While we're waiting, I just wanted to thank councillors for a good debate tonight and discussion of our finances. Thank you very much. And also to town staff for putting everything together in a way that was easy for some of us newbies to digest. So thank you. Mr. Brennan.
So, Your Worship, right now at the end of 2018, we will have 789,000 in the reserve.
Very good. Councillor Sherwood, did you have anything further?
Well, again, knowing that, yes, there are some certain properties under appeal, it seems pretty consistent that most of the big box places will appeal every year anyway, and that there is probably a Canada-wide, that they'll do it all Canada-wide. I would like to see that go back to 400,000, but that's strictly wondering what the wishes of my fellow council members are.
May I make a recommendation that we let this ride and that we monitor closely what happens in 2019, and maybe we can make that decision for next budget? I
can sense that I'm not going to get any support on this, but
I mean, we're not, we're actually not spending that money. It's just being put in reserve for the eventual loss of that tax money, which it sounds like it's going to happen. So I don't know. Anybody else have an appetite to change that at this point? No, sorry. Okay. I think we're ready to have a motion to adjourn, I believe. Oh, bylaw. Okay. Okay. Notice of motion. Sorry. Yes, go ahead.
I was going to
Councillor
speak to new business when we get there,
Yes,
but I'll let you get
sorry.
there.
Notice of motion at meeting. Okay. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, I'd like to put forward a notice of motion for the next council meeting. And my understanding is that we've currently, the contract agreement has expired with the Ontario OSPCA, and we're about to engage in a contract negotiation. So I'm wondering at the same time if we could have a look at the dog tag fees. The last time those fees were looked at was in 2003. So I think it would be a good time to bring that up and see how we are compared to other properties. So you can smush that motion down, Madam Clerk?
Also, in addition to that, I'd be interested to hear what the revenue has been from licenses. For instance, the town of Caledon charges 0 for dog licenses now. So I'd be interested to see what kind of revenue we get from dog licenses.
Well, you know that the OSPCA, they'll obviously up their contract if they lose the revenue because they keep the revenue. Right. Madam Clerk, perhaps you can answer that?
Excuse me, through you, Mayor Brown. Yes, the OSPCA keeps the revenue. Last year it was just under $35,000.
On dog licenses?
On dog licenses, yes.
Okay, very good.
So I guess basically what I'm asking for, Your Worship, is that we review the actual dog tag fees because that hasn't been done since 2003.
Right.
That would be my motion.
Okay, second. I'm sorry. Madam Clerk.
Sorry, I took this to be a notice of motion for consideration at the next council meeting.
Yes.
Correct.
So there's no vote tonight.
Right. Okay. Councillor Taylor, or Peters, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I'll just ask for further clarification on that. Would there be a motion tonight to have a staff report on it, or do you want to jump right to the motion at the next meeting? Just if we're looking for staff feedback, obviously, you may want to build that into it, Councillor Sherwood. I just want to get the process right.
Madam Clerk, a little guidance, maybe? Sorry.
Through you, Mayor Brown. I would have taken it that the motion, and I can work on the motion with Councillor Sherwood, would be to direct staff to review the dog license fees and report to council.
Right. Okay, very good. Any other notices of motion? Councillor Poster Peters, sorry. Yeah, Councillor Peters.
I thought you might have got to new business, so I can wait if there's another notice of motion.
Okay, let's go to new business, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This may get lost in the shuffle of all the budget conversations, and for those that have turned off the TV and gone to bed, congratulations. But I thought I'd take just a moment to update everybody on the Credit Valley Conservation Board meeting. We met for the first time as a new board last week. It was very successful. A lot of interesting folks on that board from Mississauga, Oakville, Caledon, Brampton, and the like. I guess one of the main things that came out of that addresses Bill 66, which of course we discussed last week. They took a stance on it as well, and that was ahead of the public consultation period. So, you know, it's not just the municipalities that are sort of speaking out against this. Their motion was perhaps not as strongly worded. They have a much closer tie to the province when it relates to funding and partnerships and that sort of thing. So, you know, the message was, the intent was still there, and obviously the Conservation Board will be fighting to keep as much of the watershed intact and preserved as possible. But that was one of the main things that came out of that, and I just thought not everyone's going to read the CVC board meeting minutes when they finally hit our agenda package for receiving. So I just thought I'd add that.
Great. Thank you for the update, Councillor Peters. Any other new business? Seeing none. We have a bylaw recommendation that the bylaws listed below be read. Bylaw to appoint Faye West as Deputy Treasurer and Acting Treasurer. A bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Corporation of the Town of Orangeville at its Budget Council meeting held today, January 21st, 2019. May I have a motion? Recommend Councillor Peters, second Deputy Mayor McIntosh. All in favor? Passed unanimously. May I have a motion to adjourn? Deputy Mayor McIntosh, second Councillor Sherwood. All in favor? Thank you, everybody.